Bom, muito boa noite a todos. Eu peço imensa desculpa em nome da organização não ter havido um serviço de tradução, ficará para uma próxima conferência. Por isso as minhas desculpas, vou ter que fazer a apresentação, uma ligeira introdução em inglês e esta conferência será feita toda em inglês. Your Excellency, Madam Ambassador of Hungary, Professor Emilia Fabian, welcome. Mr. President of the Heritage Foundation, Professor Kevin Roberts, and members of the board present here, you are very welcome. Mr. President of the Historical Society of the Independence of Portugal, the owner of this space, Dr. José Ribeiro Castro, will come later to close the conference because he is in the inauguration of the mayor municipality, the new mayor here in the municipality. Former Ambassador Francisco Henriques da Silva, thank you so much. Professor Jaime Nogueira Pinto, it's an honor to have you here. Dear young people interested in true and fruitful politics, you are very welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in dystopian times. I believe there are 4 fundamental reasons for this dystopia that cannot and should not be ignored. First of all, God has been placed outside of institutional thought, and a society that forms without placing the human person at the center of political decision-making ends up placing them at the service of totalitarian ideologies and dictates. Second, the family, with father, mother, and children, the basic cell of a balanced society and transmitter of enduring values, has been continuously attacked, and the result is the divorce rate above 70% recorded in Portugal. All of these related to woke policies, feminisms, and gender ideologies. 3. Work, once a symbol of honorable activity that helped provide for the family and give purpose to life, has been transformed into a relational mercantilism, stripped of any social and pedagogical function. The large corporations that owned canteens, schools, hospitals, daycare centers, and holiday camps have been replaced by open offices in exchange for a few meal allowances and 13 and 14 months' salaries. Finally, the notion of respect for others and the common good, so deeply ingrained in us, in the small details, like hearing my father tell us, "Run to the car because someone is waiting to take our place in the park," or in the demands of our civil engineering, so that the safety of people and property would never be threatened, or in intergenerational solidarity, where parents lived in their children's homes when they could no longer live independently. These pillars, which have been forgotten, are part of the diagnosis of a sick society. But I deeply believe that initiatives like these, which put us in contact with the best in the world, which awaken the conscience of young people, along with the imperative need to create a structured think tank based on a clear and consistent public policy strategy, can reverse the downward spiral. Portugal was the first country in the West to create the global world, which experienced all the flavors, creeds, and races of the world, without ever losing its identity and its Christian roots. I now call our speakers to the table. Begin with Miguel Nunes da Silva, please. Miguel is the director of Terzeno Institute. He holds a degree in international relations from the University of Lisbon and a master's degree in European studies from the College of Europe. His career has included work in various United Nations and European Union agencies, as well as the private sector. He is currently a local representative in Oeiras, and his analysis can be found in many national and international publications like the European Conservatives. Teresa Nogueira Pinto, you are very welcome. She has a bachelor's degree in political science from Catholic Portuguese University, master in international relations in Catholic Portuguese University, and a PhD in globalization studies in Nova University. She's now an assistant university professor and was visitor researcher in the Heritage Foundation some years ago. Mr. Professor Kevin Roberts, please welcome. PhD in American History from the University of Texas. Master's degree in History by Virginia Tech and a bachelor's degree in History by University of Louisiana. President of Heritage Foundation, a non-profit, non-partisan research and education institute. The Heritage Foundation is the nation's premier conservative think tank. It is the most broadly supported think tank in the world, drawing support from more than 500,000 members. Heritage's policy impact is also unrevealed with the University of Pennsylvania's annual report on think tanks, recognizing Heritage 3 years in a row as the think tank with the most significant impact on public policy. Thank you so much. Good conference for you.
Thank you very much, Luis, for that wonderful introduction. I would like to also thank Abel Sench for helping us organize, invaluable help. And Madam Ambassador, thank you for presenting us with your honorable presence. And a word for our videographers from Veritas Liberate Institute, which is another think tank in Portugal that is very worthwhile getting to know. Without them, of course, this would not be possible. Thank you very much for helping us tonight. And of course, a word of thanks to the Historical Society for the Independence of Portugal, again, for lending us this wonderful room. A magnificent room and full of history, which we've had the pleasure of sharing with our American guests. And of course, thank you to our guest of honor, Kevin Roberts, and to the other guest speaker, Teresa Nogueira Pinto, and to all the other members of Heritage who came to Portugal and for taking an interest in our country and in our work here. I thought that I would start, also for the benefit of our American guests, with a short history of what the relations have been between the Portuguese conservative movement and the American conservative movement. So, as you might know, Portugal was actually one of the first countries to recognize the United States diplomatically. It has to be said, however, that it was not done out of ideological sympathy. So Portugal was an absolutist monarchy at the time. Nassau was a liberal republic, so the recognition was just made for diplomatic self-interest. It is also true that Portugal is a founding member of NATO, and we're joined by that history as well. But that too, during the post-war administrations, was not done for ideological agreement. Rather, it was, I think, basically a compensation for Portugal having helped the Allies during the war effort. And I can tell you that I've looked at the diplomatic cables myself, and one of the goals of Portugal at the time in the 1940s was to bring Spain along to NATO. We had an excellent diplomatic relationship with Spain, and of course that did not come to pass. So there was not much ideological agreement, but there was a very good diplomatic relationship at the time. I think that there are three main moments of the history of the Portuguese and the American rights. The first big moment is during the Nixon administration. And this is mostly because during the Kennedy administration, relations were awful. So there was a huge contrast with the incoming Kissinger as a Secretary of State. Of course, Portugal was a dictatorship at the time, and the United States did not look kindly upon that. But we did have a very good working relationship with several congressmen and senators in Congress. And there was some tensions, but there was I think a great deal of mutual understanding between the two countries. And of course, at the time, as you might know, Portugal being a dictatorship, the regime did not necessarily promote the political debate within the country. So mostly I'm talking about the relationship between the Department of State and the Portuguese government. The other next big moment in our history of the transatlantic rights, let's put it that way, was during the Iraq War, interestingly enough. So as you might remember, Portugal and Spain were some of the only two governments in Western Europe to support the intervention by the United States in Iraq. And it's worthwhile taking a moment to reflect on why that was. It is true, it should be said, and we have Professor Jaime Nogueira Pinto here, and he will be a witness to that there was a great deal of, there were many connections between the Portuguese right and the Beltway on think tanks and also with the International Republican Institute on the party level. And during those times, I have to say, I don't think that the ideology of the British administration and the ideology of the Portuguese government at the time was the same. The Bush administration, as we know, was very heavily influenced by neoconservatism. There were some neoconservatives in Portugal, but they were a very small minority. I would say that PSD and CDS at the time were mostly neoliberal. But also, another parallel is that some of the people who, if not outright supporting the intervention in Iraq, at least looked upon it objectively, kindly even, were people that were present on the right, but they had also come from the left. So there was some commonality with American neoconservatives, interestingly enough. That partnership did not last very long. The government in Portugal that supported the intervention did not last very long. But I would argue, and this brings us to tonight's conference, that we are now living the best moment in relations between Portuguese conservatives and American conservatives. And that is because, not just because they exist in both countries, but in the case of the United States, they managed to reach power in a very defined way. In Portugal, not quite just yet, but the Portuguese right that is now interacting and collaborating with the US right wing is, I would say, very, very similar on ideological terms. And this includes even, I would say, with the MAGA movement itself. Because if you look at Chega's presence in Portugal today, it is a conservative party, unabashedly right wing. And it is also present not in the traditional bastions of the right in Portugal, which would be the Catholic North, but rather in the Lisbon suburbs and in Alentejo, a rural area, but historically very left-wing. And where do we see the strongest support for Trump and for Make America Great Again in the US? Is it in Louisiana, Alabama, the traditional South? Not so much. Donald Trump is not from the South. He's not particularly religious. He's not an evangelical. Rather, I see a great deal of sympathy for Make America Great Again and the Trump administration in the Rust Belt, in the Midwest. So not a typically conservative area of the US necessarily. And I think that in spite of our cultural differences, it is true that we are a Latin country, we are a Mediterranean country, we are a Catholic country. So there's a great deal of cultural separation between us. But the potential that exists for cooperation and collaboration between the Portuguese conservative right and the American conservative right is now the best it has ever been. I can only say it's a shame that conservatives in Portugal are not in power, but in spite of that, I see the greatest amount, the greatest level of uniformity or mutual understanding on ideological, political, philosophical terms than I've ever seen before. And with that, I leave the floor to Teresa, who will tell us more about the current state of conservatism in the West. Thank you.
Obrigada. Então não preciso disto. Okay, so good afternoon to you all, and let me start by thanking Miguel Nunes Silva and the Instituto 300 for the invitation. It is truly a pleasure to be here. Thank Luís Gallardini Graça for the kind introduction, and of course thank Kevin Roberts for being here and all of you that came from Heritage. It is a huge honor to welcome you here in Lisbon. And I'll just start with a personal, not so personal note. Almost 20 years ago, I had just finished college and had the opportunity to go to the Heritage Foundation to do an internship as an independent researcher. And so I went to Heritage and to Washington, and I went there to study what was by then the hot topic of the moment, which was neoconservatism. And almost 2 decades later, I can only say what a journey this has been for us conservatives, and I would dare to ask how many bullets have we dodged since then. And so now focusing on the topic of this conference, Transatlantic Conservatism in the Age of Trump, I think that we can think of this movement as a journey. And the journey that started with a very, very specific goal, and also a very urgent goal, which was to stop decline. And like all grand journeys, this was marked by some watershed moments, and we can think about the first election of Donald Trump, Brexit, the victory of Giorgia Meloni in Italy, Javier Milei, the reconfiguration of party systems all across Europe, inclusively here in Portugal, with the new right-wing party Chega emerging. And I think we must also think about other watershed moments when we came to terms with reality. And I always remember, Kevin, your remarks at Davos. And I vividly remember listening to them and thinking, well, you were there at the belly, one of the bellies of the beast, speaking very inconvenient truths to power. And I remember thinking, okay, maybe decline is not inevitable. Maybe there's something we can do here. But this is also a journey about political leadership. And so what we saw, and we saw that in Trump and in many other leaders, was first, which is of course a necessary condition, leaders who realized what was at stake. But this is not enough. It also takes courage, and I guess it took a lot of courage for these leaders to act accordingly with that. And so I think political leadership was also very important. And I always say that, and there is a big debate now, and I think there's a big debate also on the right, what is the political virtue of our times, of these times we were given to live? And many would say moderation. Well, I don't think it's moderation. I think it's definitely courage. And also that leadership, and we see that throughout history, leadership and charismatic leadership is often personalized. And I think that we are also seeing that at this moment. And so these leaders, faced with decline, believed it was possible to reverse it, to stop it. Not only to manage it, as we see in so many countries, including in Portugal, where we have a government that is just managing decline, or to accelerate it, as we saw with the Biden administration, as we are seeing now with Keir Starmer in the UK, with Pedro Sanchez in Spain. But they believed it was actually possible to reverse decline. And so this was a first very important step, and they got their hands on the job. And when I think about these leaders, I think, of course, about Donald Trump, and I don't think that the Americans know how important it was for us, for the Portuguese right and the European right, to see the first victory of Donald Trump. Because, and here in Portugal, this has been going on since the 1974 revolution, our right was colonized by the left, which, of course, we can explain that through historical factors, but the cultural domain, etc. And so for the first time, we had the chance to speak for ourselves, to say what actually does the right think and what public policies does it defend and so on. So it was very important. Then we have other leaders, J.D. Vance, who I hope, but of course you know much better than me, but I do hope embodies the future of American conservatism. But here in Portugal, here in Europe, we have Viktor Orban, who in times of uncertainty and always being demonized by Eurocrats, made sure that Budapest was another shining city upon a hill, of course not taking the place of Washington, but I think that was quite important for the conservative movement in Europe. We have Giorgia Meloni, who with amazing grace always claims the roots of the Western civilization and is reshaping European geopolitics. And that's very encouraging. Javier Milei, and of course André Ventura, who has been fighting this good fight here in Portugal. But also, I think that this journey is also, and perhaps mostly, a journey about the common people. The so-called deplorables, the forgotten men and women of the working classes. And I'll share a quote with you by George Eliot, which I really like because I think it translates the importance of the common people. And it says, "The growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs." So this has been clearly a revolt of common people and common sense. Interestingly, of what John Stuart Mill defined as the despotism of customs, against a woke ideology imposed by a post-national, post-Christian elite totally out of touch with reality. The revolt of the common people who feel they are becoming strangers in their own land, who no longer recognize their streets, their neighborhoods, their cities. The revolt of the somewheres against the arrogance of the everywheres and their luxury beliefs. The revolt of people who work hard to pay taxes, and taxes here in Portugal are very, very high, or not, to pay taxes to a state that does not fulfill the basic duties of sovereignty, starting by protecting borders, but happily sponsors programs, of course with our money, of indoctrination and re-education in the Orwellian promises of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But this is also, I think, a journey about all those who came before us. The great men and women who throughout centuries and generations built the Western civilization. In history, in arts, in political thought, in literature, in war. Through a very long dialogue that the progressive left has always systematically tried to interrupt, and in many cases succeeded in interrupting. That's why I think that we conservatives in both sides of the Atlantic have this dilemma now. Can we restore institutions, or are some of them beyond redemption? And I think that we are all faced with this dilemma. This is also, and I think we must always highlight this, especially younger people, this is also a fight for freedom, and I would say the fight for freedom. But a fight for freedom waged by people who know that there is no freedom without roots and without identity. And that we are free not as abstract, self-sufficient individual fulfilling momentaneous needs, but we are free as social and political beings. As children, as fathers, as mothers, as part of a people, as heirs of specific legacies, and nations, as Vice President J.D. Vance recalled us, are not ideas. But this is also, and very importantly, a journey about the future. So taken for all those who will come after us. So a journey not only about preserving, even because there are many, many things in the liberal order that we should not preserve, but about rebuilding and building. And I think that if we think about the three main ideologies of modernity, being socialism, liberalism, and conservatism, and if we add a fourth ideology of the 21st century, which is wokeism, the only one that talks to us with hope about the future is conservatism. We have references, heroes, martyrs like Charlie Kirk, who gave his life for freedom and for truth. And what do we see on the other side? We see people saying, I'm not having children because I suffer from eco-anxiety. What can be more pessimistic than giving up on our living heritage because we want to preserve the planet? And I would like to ask them, for whom do you want to preserve the planet? And by now you must have already realized that I'm a huge fan of Vice President J.D. Vance, but I think it's very important also for us conservatives in Portugal and in Europe to understand what he says when he says we need a culture that celebrates life at all stages, one that recognizes and truly believes, and I highlight the truly believes, that the benchmark of national success is not our GDP numbers or our stock market, but whether people feel they can raise thriving and healthy families in our country. And we are seeing very good initiatives and ideas coming from countries as Hungary, Poland, Italy. We know that public policies that actually value family, recognizing it as the most natural human community, it takes commitment, sacrifices, choices, but I really hope that soon we will have that kind of policies here in Portugal. Finally, this journey has also been an encounter, a very fruitful dialogue between patriots and conservatives across the Atlantic, influenced by different references, of course, but based on the same eternal truths. It has been about resistance, it has been about humor, and I cannot explain you how fun it was to see the liberal meltdown after the first and the second victory of Donald Trump. So definitely a lot of humor also unites us. And also, and I think that this is something that we all agree on, about the need to restore beauty in our lives, in our private lives, beauty in our public spaces. And God only knows how we need that. And now the time has come, and it has come, thankfully for you in the US, not only to resist, but to build, and I believe that that time will come also to Portugal sooner rather than later. And so we will have to have the moral and the political imagination to renew all those things that are in fact permanent. The conservative right will be called upon not just to resist, but to deliver. And I do believe we have the right principles. If I didn't, I wouldn't be here. But we will have to convert them into public policies that actually deliver results, policies for the common good. And so knowing that our nations are different and we are patriots, and so we are guided by the love of our own nation, we truly hope that we can count with the good examples and the wise advice of our American friends. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teresa. I see someone has been bringing the hillbilly eulogy. And now I give the floor to our keynote speaker, Dr. Kevin Roberts.
You trust me. Good? All right. Success. You're welcome. Thanks. What an honor to be with you tonight. I want to thank Teresa for her wonderful comments. How about another round of applause for Tour de Force? Thank you. Miguel and Instituto Trezeño, thank you so much for hosting this, for all of the work that you do, but also for the promise that you offer for Portugal and free people. Thank you. And last but not least, Luis, thank you for your own role in helping to organize this and for your wonderful opening comments. I'm going to start my formal comments with an observation. I was trained as an American historian, yes, but an American historian at a history department at the University of Texas that focused on transatlantic history. And I've long wanted to be in Portugal because of its history in that world. And that history, of course, is our present and also our future. But the real observation that I want to make as I begin some reflections on where we go from here as a people of the West is on time and on place. Two things historians are kind of infatuated by. It strikes me that it's the 11th day of the 11th month, a day we mark not only in Europe and in the United States, but around the world as the day when the fighting ended, an event that was the war to end all wars. And while we have some analysis about where we go from here over the last 100 years, it's important to stop and reflect in gratitude, which is the heart of conservatism, for the men who gave their lives in that conflict, the Second World War that followed, all of the conflicts since, but especially for our veterans, men and women in uniform here on your continent and on ours. In the United States, we call this Veterans Day, and it is a tremendous celebration for their sacrifice. And of course, intrinsic in that sacrifice of a military man or military woman is honor. But if you ask them why, they would tell you to the person, because of love of nation, which is a way of saying, for academics, a love of sovereignty, a love of self-governance. Two very related attributes, civic virtues, if you will, permanent things that bind the West, and especially my country, the United States, and yours, Portugal. Thinking about location, it's impossible, standing in this room, not to observe the importance of place, this very palace, where in 1640, your countrymen began an act of reclaiming sovereignty. And so I'd like to use those two facts, time and location, to frame the comments that I've prepared tonight. And I can tell you on behalf of my colleagues at Heritage, and whether those here, but also all of them back in Washington, and for that matter around the world, doing the Lord's work, that we love your country, we love your institute, we love where things seem to be going, we know we have a lot of work ahead. So the first thing to say about our topic tonight, transatlantic conservatism in the age of Trump, is that to be successful, each nation's own conservatism must put its own nation first. It must be grounded in its own distinct national culture, its own history, its own identity, and put at the service of its own sovereign citizens. You and I know that that claim, which is so common sense, is heresy. Heresy to elites on both of our continents. Mostly on the left, but also, we must acknowledge respectfully, a few on the right, who fancy themselves citizens of the world. The nationalist populist conservatism surging across the West today is smeared by elites, even as we gather here, as close-minded, intolerant, and backward. But I submit these charges are not only false, they represent what psychologists call projection. For the record shows, with increasingly tragic clarity, that it is the elite ideology of globalism that is actually guilty of those very pathologies. Contrary to elite opinion, national interest and citizen sovereignty are not obstacles to peace, prosperity, and progress. They are the only soil in which those aspirations can take root and from which they can durably grow. And so they must be at the center of successful conservatism in this age of Trump, in Europe, in the United States, and everywhere else. They are certainly at the core of President Trump's most successful initiatives, and they are how conservatives of the so-called new right can rescue the West from both the Marxist left and the globalist establishment, at home and abroad. Before looking at conservative successes and opportunities today, we should first appreciate just how complete the Western elite's 35-year experiments with globalism and supranationalism have failed. Think back to the 1980s and 90s, the end of the Cold War and the dawn of what President George H.W. Bush called the New World Order. Remember what we were promised: peace, shared prosperity and mutual respect, freedom and democracy, justice and equality. To the working families who make up the lion's share of citizens of Western nations, globalism failed to deliver on all of the above. It did not prevent wars in Ukraine, Iraq, and the Balkans. In many ways, globalism stoked them. It caused the migration crises, destabilizing Western nations on both sides of the Atlantic. Unilateral free trade, with China in particular, cost us jobs, wages, industries, and more political and industrial espionage than we'll ever know. Globalist institutions, such as the United Nations, the European Union, NAFTA, and the World Trade Organization, have weakened the sovereignty, independence, and economic resilience of member states. These institutions were created by strong, independent, sovereign democracies and then betrayed them. A textbook example of this rot is the United States Agency for International Development. USAID was created in 1961 to establish foreign aid as a permanent tool of U.S. diplomacy. It primarily funded programs to improve healthcare, agriculture, education, and infrastructure in poor countries. The aid was certainly humanitarian, but that's not why we gave it. USAID, and U.S. foreign aid generally, was a strategic lever for checking Soviet communism in the developing world. Like the Marshall Plan and NATO, USAID served other countries' interests, but we founded and funded them for ours. It was in our interests to help rebuild Western Europe. It was in our interests to deter Soviet aggression. It was in our interests to keep anti-American ideologues out of Africa, out of Asia, out of South America. USAID's mission was to build allies. That clarity of purpose made these initiatives work. USAID wasn't welfare, in other words. It wasn't paternalistic. It was part of a nationalist strategy to protect America against violent, godless, global totalitarianism. When the Cold War ended, USAID lived on. Without a Soviet Union to resist, the agency was captured by the same kind of entitled left-wing mediocrities that took over our college faculties, our government bureaucracies, and our corporate media newsrooms. They twisted USAID into an instrument of left-wing culture wars. The agency promoted abortion, the LGBT agenda, and gender-affirming care, DEI, climate extremism, and anti-American, anti-free enterprise propaganda. It wasted tens of billions of dollars on duplicative, irrelevant programs. In more recent years, it funded international NGOs who were encouraging and helping Central Americans to illegally immigrate to the United States, literally fueling with our own people's tax money our own migration crisis. The agency did not reflect the American people's values or serve America's interests. Everyone running the program knew it, and worse still, they were proud of that fact. Conservatives knew it too. In Congress, in several presidential administrations, and in organizations, I am proud to say, like the Heritage Foundation. We published our first report calling for the elimination of USAID in 1995. Even liberals knew the agency was broken. The Clinton administration tried to reform it. The Obama administration admitted that humanitarian aid to Afghanistan might have helped the Taliban. We know that over the years, USAID money ended up in the hands of terrorists in Gaza, in Syria, in Somalia, and Yemen. So when President Trump was elected last year, everyone in the conservative policy community wondered how he would deal with the agency's myriad problems. The president considered lots of options, no doubt. But ultimately he chose, completely correctly, to cut the Gordian knot and eliminate it altogether. The immediate reactions were, as you might expect. The left gasped, the right cheered, and the media went on the attack. But despite the predictable attacks, the president delivered on this massive win, and he deserves our gratitude for it. Conservatives on both sides of the Atlantic, as we ask these wonderful questions about where we go from here, should remember this episode. We should study it and learn from it. Because the Trump administration's elimination of USAID is an object lesson in how nationalist, populist, conservative reform delivers outcomes promised but never achieved by the left and the establishment. At home and abroad, politically and culturally, economically and strategically, shutting down USAID was not a necessary evil, but an affirmative good. It is good for the United States, for instance, that our foreign aid programs don't facilitate illegal immigration, and that taxpayers don't promote Marxist, anti-American ideologies. It is good for the culture of Washington, D.C., what we affectionately call the swamp, that bureaucrats and publicly funded NGOs clearly understand they work for U.S. taxpayers, not the other way around. That might be something the European Commission could remember. It is good that government agencies know that they can, in fact, be shuttered, just like failing private enterprises. It is good that America's sovereign citizens recognize and understand that dysfunctional government programs indeed can be eliminated. It puts our national discourse on much better ground. Similarly, it is good for Western democracies to see that our decades-long drift left is not a one-way ratchet. President Trump, President Orban, Madam Ambassador, Brexit, President Millet, the populist movement spreading across this continent and ours and others, the elimination of USAID, like President Trump's securing of our border and ongoing remaking of our judiciary, show that sovereignty still exists if citizens and leaders have the courage and the will to assert it. Eliminating USAID is even good for the nations that used to receive America's supposed aid. They were not being treated like friends in need, but as guinea pigs for the experiments of utopian frauds. Like so many domestic welfare programs, the agency trapped developing nations into dependency. It also poisoned America's reputation in the developing world because the terrible ideas USAID promoted were as toxic to those in African, Asian, and South American countries as it is to us. For all progressives talk about colonialism and imperialism, leftist elites love nothing more than imposing their values on the developing world. Finally, eliminating USAID is good for the world because it puts the lie to the global left's hand-wringing about nationalism, populism, and the reassertion of citizen sovereignty. The fear that the approach known as America First would trigger international tension, competitiveness, and the zero-sum thinking that leads to strife has proven groundless. The evidence is clear. Globalist elitism, which was supposed to be a cure to international conflicts, has only exacerbated them. It was supposed to bring us together, but its core impulses, the centralization of unaccountable power, the erasure of national sovereignty and borders, religious intolerance, censorship, materialism are tearing us apart. The lesson, therefore, of 2025 is that sovereignty not only can mitigate globalist dysfunction, it already is. As we like to say in Washington, we're winning and we're not tired of it. It is not a coincidence that it was President Trump, not a globalist establishment, Republican or Democrat, who secured the Abraham Accords and the ceasefire in Gaza, who dealt swiftly and decisively with Iran's nuclear program, who got NATO states to live up to their obligations. President Trump set aside the artificial abstractions of the rules-based international order and negotiated agreements that served the signatories' own interests. National interest clarifies international relations. Globalism muddles it. And the prioritization of sovereignty impels leaders to respect other countries' sovereignty as well. It's what enables nations to treat each other as equals on mutually agreeable terms. When Americans put America first, and Mexicans put Mexico first, and Canadians put Canada first, that helps the North American alliance. Of course, President Orban should put Hungary first. Of course, Prime Minister Montenegro should put Portugal first. And of course, Prime Minister Sanchez should put Spain first. Sovereignty does not inhibit peace, prosperity, and cooperation. Remember, the word international means between nations. Countries that transparently and unapologetically put their own interest first can unify and build trust at home and abroad in this increasingly distrusting era. The only thing citizen sovereignty threatens is the elite's sense of entitlement to money, power, and privilege. Here again, the shuttering of USAID makes the point. It led to none, literally none, of the terrible outcomes elites said it would. The United States has not turned its back on the world. We still provide foreign aid. It's just that under the current administration, everyone understands that aid is an investment by the American people in American interests. Abusing that money, funneling it towards globalist, anti-American, anti-Western causes simply no longer will be tolerated by the American people. Recipient nations and organizations understand they are partners. U.S. foreign aid is not charity. It comes with corresponding responsibilities to the United States, responsibilities set by us, not for us, by people we never elected. In both domestic politics and foreign affairs, the problem is the same. Globalist institutions have no real skin in the game. They are not threatened by war, terrorism, censorship, crime, open borders, unfair trade deals, cultural imperialism, family breakdown, or authoritarianism. Indeed, the last 35 years suggest they see those things as in their interests. The worse things get for the peoples of the West, the better they seem to become for so-called citizens of the world. The more problems we suffer, the more authority they usurp. The less democratic our governments, the more our citizens become their subjects. Globalist elites promise the West the world, but are only robbing the world of the West. From foreign aid to trade, to immigration, to the rule of law, to fundamental questions of religion and morality, they have turned on the sovereign nations that gave them their authority in the first place. 3 decades into their ascent, we now know that for all globalism's flowery rhetoric, it is dysfunctional, intolerant, and corrupt. Principled, populist, national conservatism is not a mere reaction to globalism's failure, but a solution to it. It is how independent sovereign nations can build the peaceful and prosperous world all our people deserve. I began my comments reflecting on time and place. And I'm hopeful that those reflections will remind us that it is our heritage and our future as peoples of the West to reclaim our sovereignty, to reclaim our self-governance, and bit by bit, conference by conference, election by election, conversation by conversation, go re-seize and revitalize what is ours. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. This was an inspirational speech. I'm very taken with it. And I can tell you why, because all your ideas resonated with me because I personally was able to observe the thinking of the globalist elites. I worked in Brussels, I worked for UN agencies as well. I remember when I was in Brussels thinking, this is a great city, it's a political city. Came from political science, so I was going to be able to go to debates and to conferences and workshops. And they were there, but the message was always the same. There was no variety, there was no difference, there was no true debate. And whenever the topic of the populists of Europe came about, the notion was always the same. It was that, what are we doing wrong, we, the EU institutions, in communicating how great we are? No one ever questioned if they were great or if they were doing too much. It was always the same narrative. How can we enlighten the European peoples as to how great we, the institutions, are? I also remember my time in the UN on how much money is spent on UN initiatives that are for the sole purpose of defending progressive values of the West. There are female farmers in the third world that are paid to take over the family and work and basically destroy the social structure that exists in those countries. Because we, the West, like to sponsor feminism, and like to sponsor abortion, and like to sponsor euthanasia, and like to sponsor homosexuality. So your speech certainly resonates with me. I'll recount one more episode. I remember when I was visiting the European Parliament once so about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And there was an exhibition. The European Parliament receives delegations from all the countries, they have art exhibits, they have the national days and regional days. And this one exhibition was about nationalism. And as you can imagine, it was about the horrors and the dangers of nationalism. Mind you, not ultra-nationalism, not fascism, plain nationalism. In the European Parliament, they hated nationalism. And I've had the occasion to write for the European Conservative on this topic. It is a huge problem that these institutions have taken root. They've been there for decades, and the people who inhabit these institutions, the bureaucrats, and also the UN personnel, they don't see themselves as nationals because they come from multinational families. So to them, to be international, multinational, to be a nowhere or anywhere is the norm. So they have developed a completely different identity and personality. Now, thank you so much for the topic of USAID. I'm going to exploit you because I want us to stay on that topic for just a few more minutes. Since we'll take the cue from you, and then we'll move on to other topics of mutual interest in Portuguese-American relations. I would like to ask first Teresa, because Madam Ambassador from Hungary is here, and we know of the impact that USAID had in Hungarian elections, or at least tried to have in Hungarian elections. And I was wondering if Teresa could speak to us a bit more about how these globalist organizations try to influence nations and try to influence their politics. I mean, we've seen this happen not just in Hungary, but also in Romania and other places. Teresa, if you don't mind.
É assim? Não preciso ligar nada? Não. Ok. Posso falar assim? Mais longe. Ok. Thank you, Kevin, for that very inspirational address. And I was listening to you, and I was thinking, I think that now the problem that we have, and we can pretty much see what was going on in the United States and what is going on here with the European Commission, and everything sounds like empire. And I think that the problem we have to deal with now is that after the prophets came and went to the American campuses, and all people were reading was Foucault and so on. But now we don't have the prophets, we have the bureaucrats, which can be much more dangerous, because I don't think that they believe in what they're saying anymore, but they know they have to say it to earn their money at the end of the month. And so what we see is that these lines from global and federalist agendas, all this talk about sustainability, inclusion, and so on, people just repeat that at the national level, and they have no idea what they're talking about, and they don't believe in what they're talking about. And I think that's our greatest strength, is that we believe in what we're talking about. We know what we're talking about. And I also remembered, so I think that the problem that we have here is that it's much more difficult for us to do what the Trump administration has done, which is to cut the funds. Once you cut the funds, everything becomes easier. And we have a very not leveled playing field. We have that in the media, we have that in academia, and I know that every project that you want to work on, you have to say, what's the gender perspective? I no longer do that, because, I mean, there's no gender perspective here. It has nothing to do with gender perspective. So you just have to capitulate even before you start working. And just one more aspect that I think that is related to your question, Miguel, and with Kevin's remarks, and a very interesting concept that was recovered in a recent debate between Pope Francis and Vice President J.D. Vance, the concept of ordo amoris. It's simple, and it's so intuitive, because we all understand that we love our children more than we love the children of other people, and that's okay. It doesn't mean I don't wish the best for your children, for every children in the world, but I love my children more, and I'm more interested in the future of Portugal than I am in the future of Sweden or Nigeria or whatever. And that's how things work. I mean, that's impressed in our nature, and God was wise when he made us, I guess. So I think it was that.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Kevin, on your end, would it be possible to inform us a bit more of whether there will be any scrutiny? This is the same question that I asked Victoria in Washington. I'm sorry to be a bother, but is there going to be any accountability on the projects that were carried out by USAID? I mean, we know that the funding was cut, but we don't have a profound analysis of where the funding was going. And for us in Europe, I think this would have been extremely interesting, because I'm sure that there are a number of leftist organizations that would be, that we could expose, that would be very embarrassed.
Thank you, Miguel and Teresa. On that question, if Heritage has anything to say about it, which is the full accountability on how these funds were spent, at least a majority of the funds, that will happen. And my colleagues, particularly Dr. Coates and Mike Gonzalez, might have more up-to-the-minute detail on that. The problem, which is not to excuse this, is that the administration and the Trump administration and its allies in our Congress have so much to fix in a short amount of time that it really is, I think the best metaphor is triage in an emergency room. And I don't want to overstate that analogy because we are very optimistic about the patient that is the American Republic. But for a long time, there have been a lot of diseases and cancers, just to continue this. So we will see, but with our research, which I happen to think is the best, thankfully the research of some other organizations, but also political pressure, it's important. And we'll continue to talk about that in the United States. The second thing I will say, which is a little bit of a glimpse into the future, is that it's not even so much political as it is social. The American people want accountability on this. And so it isn't that necessarily Americans are looking for scalps, although there ought to be accountability. It's that they never want to see this repeated again. And if there isn't enough pain, political pain, public pain, that's imposed upon the bureaucrats who ran roughshod over the will of the American people, and for that matter, the authority of the president himself, then the social and political project that is self-governance and sovereignty starts to lose a little bit of steam because people just colloquially say, what the heck? Why can't we do this? And I might make the same argument on a number of related topics, all of them coming back to the problems, as we call it, about the deep state. Whether it is with USAID, whether it is in the Department of Justice, we have ongoing persisting problems in our FBI in spite of very clear leadership, at every level of the executive branch. We have a cleanup to do in the Department of Education, sort of going back to the original image of an emergency room. The final thing that I will say, and is more of a political observation, President Trump, like President Bill Clinton, so I'll make this a nonpartisan comment, have a similar gift. And that is a gut instinct about what to do next. And so while it may be a little unclear about what those priorities are sometimes, we have a lot of confidence, not just in him, but also his administration. So count on Heritage to be an interlocutor, mediator with all of you here in Europe about some of the details of those studies.
Thank you. Very good. Then I would suggest switching topics. Because we started a bit late, I think that I would just open it to the public if there are any questions. Okay, so we have a couple. I'll give first the word to the former ambassador, and then to Lorenzo, and then to Salvador. Mr. Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much. It was a very enlightening speech. I appreciate it very much. I would like to ask you a few questions and a remark about wokeism, because I think it's a byproduct of the American left culture, which has been exported all over the world. Right now, I was talking to Professor Teresa Nogueira Pinto just before we started, and I said to her, barbarians are not at the gate. They are inside the city, and they are at the very heart of the city itself. So we have this problem, and we cannot get rid of this problem because it prevails. The question that I have is this: is wokeism a trend, a movement, an ideology, or a religion? Thank you.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah.
Lorenzo.
Okay, should I go there or
So good evening. I just want to say that I really appreciate your speech and your both interventions. I want to ask you something about this triumph of wokeism and intolerance in the North American academia. So some people in the right here think that this extension of intolerance and left-leaning research in the European academia is the result from the triumph of an American posture regarding the promiscuity between activism and scientific research. So would you accept the argument or the premise that this results from the influence of America, or do you think it results from the export of an anti-American posture of behavior that is very popular in America right now, but in its roots it's completely anti-American, and that the European right here should be more careful when they think that, or they assume that this left leaning and this partial posture in research is the result of American influence, which when in fact is a result of the triumph of an American posture. Thank you.
Salvador.
Well, good evening, everyone. Compliments to the organization. It has been such an interesting evening. It was a really great pleasure to hear you, Professor Roberts, Teresa as well, Miguel. I'm going to be a little bit off topic, and I'm going to change a little bit of the subject, but it will come into terms what we are talking here, that it's about artificial intelligence, because we find ourselves increasingly immersed in a technological world. Artificial intelligence is becoming ever more pervasive in our daily lives, and the growing number of people, particularly the younger generation, such as my own, are turning to AI as a means of coping with loneliness, for example, and emotional isolation. At the same time, there has been a notable geographic and cultural shift within the technological industry, from Silicon Valley towards states like Texas or Florida. This migration coincides with a broader realignment in which elements of the conservative movement have begun to engage more closely with big tech. Such developments may offer a glimpse into the ideological and political dynamics that will shape the future relationship between technology and society. And so, my question therefore it is, what role can and should conservatism play in responding to the growing power of artificial intelligence? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will just add one more question that one of our supporters insisted on. So the answer is up to you, of course. But this answer, obviously, for Kevin, a question for Kevin. The question was related to the speeches that President Trump has made regarding Europe and the tensions that some of them have caused, namely with issues like Greenland. Should Europeans and the European right take this literally, rhetorically? Is there a cause for concern, or was it just a negotiation tactic on the part of the White House? How does Heritage see that? And with that, I think I saw that Teresa had some notes. Maybe she might want to comment on some of those questions, and then I'll give the word to Kevin again.
Sorry, very shortly, I promise. Just on the question posed by Salvador, I was astonished yesterday by discovering that we already have grief bots. So when you lose someone, AI can kind of reproduce that person you lost. And I was thinking about the Warren of Tocqueville in The End of Democracy in America, when he talks about atomization and how tyranny may re-enter the world. Well, by becoming more and more lonely because we don't have families, we don't have a parish, we don't know the people in our neighborhood, we become more and more vulnerable to that despotic power, which can be the state, which can be Brussels, or it can be artificial intelligence. So I think that Tocqueville gave us some very interesting points on that. And very, very briefly on the question on wokeism, because we both I organized, and the ambassador wrote a book on this topic of
wokeism, and just wanted to share my view on that topic, because I think that it's very interesting that wokeism mixes three aspects: two ideologies and the attempt to rebuild a religion without God. So it's a form of failed Marxism. We no longer have historical materialism, because of course it didn't work, but we still have that idea of a permanent struggle between identities. It is the attempt to create a religion without God. So we have the dogmas, the rituals, sin, guilt, but we have no horizon of salvation. Again, there's nothing as pessimistic as the progressive left and wokeism. And finally, and I think that this is where we have a problem, it is the form of liberalism that prevailed, because it imagines the individual emancipating himself from everything and atomized. And so I think, and it leads us to the question of whether we can and we should have neutral institutions, or that's just a liberal fantasy. And I'll just go.
Very interesting stuff, for sure. I'm reminded of a recent article, let's put it that way, by the Britain-based Lotus Eaters. I don't know if you've heard of them, Kevin, but Carl Benjamin had a very prescient observation that actually the problem that we have right now is not that Marxism has taken over. The problem that we have right now is that liberalism is vulnerable to Marxist rhetoric, namely the rhetoric of liberation from norms, then of course the atomization that, of course, the left that wants uniformity also advances. And with that, of course, give the floor to you.
I'm grateful for all the questions, and glad to know that you think that after traveling overnight and being on short sleep that I can remember what the answer should be. I'm very grateful that you think that highly of me. But this absent-minded professor took some notes. The second thing is you're counting on this American Southerner who speaks slowly to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time. So I'll be succinct, but happy to continue the conversation. I'll leave that to Miguel to moderate. Number one, Mr. Ambassador, wokeism, is it an ideology or a religion? For some people, it's essentially a religion. And the reason that can happen is building off of an observation that Teresa has mentioned a couple of times tonight, the dissipation, the deterioration of our own religious practice, whatever that may be in the West, we honor it all, basically honor them all, creates a vacuum in which something is going to reside. And that something, for a while, say in the late 1900s and early 2000s, was the centralization of power that the more traditional political left in our respective countries would engender, would cultivate, the growth of the deep state and so on. And we at Heritage thought and think that's bad enough. But what we didn't account for, and my great friend and colleague Mike Gonzalez has been writing about for a long time, is that there is something worse than that. And sort of dovetailing into the second wonderful question about Americanism or anti-Americanism, it's both. That the reason that this can be a religion or quasi-religion for so many practitioners of wokeism is because on the factor that comes from the United States, and that is academic freedom, the ridiculously outdated practice of tenure. Sorry, Teresa, I just believe that it protects some conservatives, but that's one of the greatest reforms that could happen if conservatives stay in power for a while. But the anti-Americanism, personified by the mayor-elect of New York City, has of course converged with this and has just put jet fuel into this phenomenon of wokeism being a religion. But the good news is that we believe in conversion. And we must. We're winning in the United States, we're winning the battle against wokeism. We've not won it, and I don't want to sound hubristic in saying that, but it isn't just the politics and the policy. It's that the American people have said, here's a line in the sand. We're done with this. And you've got the right to say some things, maybe even some crazy things, thinking about wokeism, but you don't have the right to earn a salary to do that on our tax money. And so there's got to be some review in public universities, for example, in K-12 schools, while still honoring speech, which we do. So that tackles the question of the second question about the premise of the triumph of wokeism, and I'll be evasive and say that it's both. You've got to have both of those strands. The third question about artificial intelligence, I have, and my colleagues have thought about this much more deeply in the last couple of years. We are doing some, I think, helpful work on this, which I'll talk about, but let me just make the philosophical claim, or the aspiration rather, really clear. Artificial intelligence must serve the dignity of the human person and human flourishing, period, full stop. And whatever a people, whatever a government has to do to prevent it from doing anything other than that, it must do. I don't care what label we are called at Heritage. You're violating conservatism, you're violating freedom, whatever it is, it's hogwash. Conservatives protect, more than anything else, the moral order. And when we stop preserving the moral order, we no longer have a project known as conservatism. There are a lot of threats to that. Clearly a lot of threats to that. Artificial intelligence is one of them. But that doesn't mean that in and of itself, it's something that we have to throw out the window. That would probably be my personal desire. I mentioned to my children at a family dinner some days ago, I said, well, I don't use AI, I don't need AI, and they just scoffed at me. In the same way that when I said that to my colleagues, they scoffed at me. I said, you use AI every day, you don't even know, Robert. So it's a tool, we know that, but conservative policymakers in our country are beginning to step up on this, and Heritage is very much with them. We're very gratified, by the way, with the approach generally that the current presidential administration is taking. They, of course, while they've got great experts on this, are learning as they go too. I don't mean that at all to be anything other than supportive. I'm a latecomer to this policy, as my colleagues know, and I realize we've really got to get ahead of the curve there. The fourth thing, I'm not sure how I can make a segue from AI to Greenland, but I guess ChatGPT could help me. Maybe we should put that cue in there and see. Look, President Trump speaks for President Trump and for his administration. Heritage can only speak for Heritage. But I am sometimes asked, in fact, I'm often asked, what's your translation of what he means? And I'm a Trump fan. Heritage is supportive within reason, which means sort of legal bounds of the administration. And we're so grateful that that man is serving a second term in office, because he's not only getting policy right, I happen to think he's saving American and Western civilization. He's from Queens. He likes to needle you. That's what Greenland's about. But if there's substance to it, it's this. And I don't know if there's substance to it. You need to, not being sharp, you got to ask them. What our understanding is at Heritage, and we support the following 1,000%, is that allies have to pull their weight. And our European allies, and some of our European allies in particular, have built their welfare states, which undermine the dignity of work and free enterprise in the human person, on the American taxpayer's dime, because we are willing to and want to defend you. Moving forward with this wonderful reset by the President and the Vice President, we have an opportunity to have a deeper friendship. And just think about it on a personal level. The greatest friend is the one who comes to you and says, I want to maintain this friendship, but I've got a fraternal correction to make. And that's a two-way street. You've got to listen. It's the nature of diplomacy. Our diplomats know that. President Trump loves this continent. He loves Portugal. He understands over centuries, millennia, the importance of Europe. But he's also saying his country's in the middle of triage in the emergency room, and it's going to come out better, it's going to come out stronger. But if you want the friendship to continue, pull your weight. and with a tremendous amount of not just respect, but friendliness on behalf of the Heritage Foundation. I can speak for Heritage. We support that 100%. Anything we can do to help our friends in Europe, or even not friends in Europe, who in good faith want to understand that, that's what we do. We don't speak for any administration, yours or ours. We're just helpful friends. We colleagues go back, the real experts go back and write on these things. You can count on us. In the same way that the administration knows with our independence that they can count on us to talk about the good things that are happening here. So a little bit of a long-winded response to that because it's such a great passion. But you said, Miguel, earlier you were going to exploit me. So I'm now going to exploit still having this microphone. And it's to make an observation, there's a little bit of an inspiration, if I may say, Professor, about your citing my favorite observer of America, Alexis de Tocqueville. And my second favorite thing that he observed 200 years ago is his concern about atomization. There has never been at least a non-American who better, more clearly understands the ethos of America than him. It is profound. And so you all know democracy in America, but do like we do at Heritage and go back and read it. My greatest worry about America and the West isn't even the religion of wokeism. It isn't even the continued cancer of the deep state, of the nonsense that comes out of the European Commission, of many other worse things, the rise of anti-Semitism, even on the political right, something you may know Heritage is in the middle of trying to help. Accounting for all of those things, it's the atomization of society. And while policy will play a role in that, politics will play a role in that, it really is a matter of the heart. And we have to know that when we do something similar to making wokeism a religion and make politics a religion, instead of religion being religion, instead of marriage not only happening but persisting, I know that's not possible for everybody. That we're human, we understand that, of not focusing on local community building, whether it be local politics, we're missing the essence of not just what it is to be conservative, but what it is to be human. And it's the conservative movement broadly defined, going back to Tocqueville, that has the answers to this. I think about William Röpke's work on community, the 19th century thinker Orestes Bronson, more contemporary, Schumacher, Small is Beautiful, aiming for that localism, the principle of a subsidiarity. And while I don't advocate for everything that the poet and essayist Wendell Berry has said, if you want some inspiration about how to connect supranational to national to local to the human, his poetry is a great inspiration. There are many others. For us as Americans, when we come to truly great, beautiful cities like Lisbon, we're reminded of how short our history is as a political experiment. But we're also reminded that the reason, with no, or at least very little American hubris in this, the reason we can be successful as a republic as we celebrate our 250th anniversary next year is because of the heritage of places like and especially including Portugal. We mean that. We're going to get the politics in the West right. There are a lot of movements, including in this country, that ought to inspire us. But those will not persist. They will not be durable if they aren't always a matter of the heart. That's what I happen to think our vice president gets so well. Put the fact that he's a politician off to the side. So eloquent. Beautiful articulation. That our country is our homeland. It's where we're born or where we immigrate to, hopefully legally. It's where we will die. It is where we will be buried. It is where, when our bodies turn to ashes and dust, we return to our homeland. That ought to be the motivating, overriding passion we have as we build our political movements.
I can see why you were asked to be president of the Heritage Foundation. So I have some good news and some bad news. The good news, Kevin, is that there will be sustenance. I know that you're tired, but we're heading towards a good restaurant,
ready to go.
right? The bad news is, of course, I don't know if you know, but actually conversion therapy has been banned in Portugal. And what this means is that minors are allowed to transition. They're allowed sex changes. But if anyone tries to convince them otherwise, that's conversion therapy. That's how perverse our system is at the moment. And now I'm going to continue the medical metaphor and simply say, I'm going to incarnate a shrink. Our time's up. I'm very sorry. We would love to continue this session, but we also started late, so I'm very sorry. We will have to end, so no more questions. I apologize. I would just move to give the floor to Dr. Ribeiro Castro, who heads the Circle Society for Independence of Portugal. Thank you now in person very much for your sitting as the room and for hosting us in your wonderful palace. And please.
Well, good evening, Kevin Roberts, President of the Heritage Foundation. I greet also Miguel and Teresa and some people in the audience, Ambassador Alexis Silva, Jean Pinto, and others. Well, I think that I risk that you'll go back to Washington and say that Portuguese have a strange tradition of giving the welcome address when we are leaving, not arriving. But I had the inauguration of the new City Hall, and the City Hall is a very strong partner of our institutions, so I could miss it. It's a pleasure and an honor to welcome the Heritage Foundation in the person of its president in our palace. I visited the foundation back in the 80s twice. We were at that time in very inspiring times of the Reagan Revolution, and I miss a lot the experience of those years. You can ask, what do you do in the Sociedade Histórica de Independência de Portugal, which I used to translate into English as Portuguese Heritage Society. So we have something in common, the heritage, which is very strong conservative value. What we do, we have very many things in our bylaws, but I resume it in we love Portugal. That's what we do. We love Portugal. We love to love Portugal. We love the history of Portugal. We love Portuguese the language. We love Portuguese the people, and we try to work to protect it from the wokeism also in Portugal. We have those kind of things also in Portugal, and to push for it in the future. We believe, I do believe, that our history is one of the strongest and most precious assets of our country. We are now entering the celebration of 900 years of Portugal, which is not very common in worldwide. And we wish to organize a celebration that lasts for 60 years, starting this year until 2085. And we are very committed to it. A large cycle, bit by bit, living in our century as we lived in the 12th century, when our first kingdom started back in 1125, and he died in 2025. And this is the way to transmit the strength and the hope in the future of our country. So this is now the biggest commitment of this institution. We refurbished the palace, paid by the city hall, and we'll try to refurbish also the culture that is running in Portuguese streets and minds. I believe that we are living very difficult and uncertain times. I think some of moves of President Trump belong to uncertain times. It's very new. We're trying to get used to it. I'm not sure that it's already the time to see that the Trump revolution will be so successful as the Reagan revolution was in the 80s. But it's certainly the right time to work for it. We have a lot of understanding to put forward, and President Trump has already made very strong moves with effects. And I hope that will be each year sharper than the year before. And so, as to Europe, we have got to take care of ourselves, mainly. I don't think that the speech of President Trump is a threat to us, much the contrary. We have gained a lot in assuming our defense on our own, and we of course have the means to do it if we apply there correctly. But this is a very challenging situation because of the Russian aggression, which poses a danger to Europe and to the world, because the direct challenge to the culture, international culture that resulted from World War II, and that calls for the respect of the borders, the respect of sovereignty of the neighbors. We understand a lot the problem of Ukraine, because during the 900 years of our history, we had sometimes some problems with our neighbors. And so we can understand what that feels like. And as a matter of fact, this palace represents the 1st of December in 1640. So the day where Portuguese nobles chased the representatives of Spanish king in 1640, and you regain our independence after we were under Spanish rule for 60 years, the single time where we have lost the control of our rule. So, thank you so much for being here. I heard you speak about wokeism in very good and hopeful direction. I hope that you are right and we smash those left-wing activists in American universities and everywhere, a kind of insect, very, very dangerous, and that we may celebrate the win of conservative values again in our lifetime. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And with that, I will close the conference. Thank you everyone for coming. I will just reiterate, the Trezino Institute is a conservative think tank. You can visit our website. We're also present on a number of social media. It's very simple. Just put Trezino on Google and you will find us. Thank you, Veritas Liberat, once again for providing us support in the media coverage. And thank you again, Heritage, for providing us this honor. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.